Alrighty, in this video, what we're going to be doing is taking a look at local node modules. So in the last video, we saw an installation with the -G flag, but really you shouldn't be using that flag for many things. Now for things like the HTTP server, it makes sense. It makes sense because that's a global utility, just a helper program that we can use anywhere in our file system, no matter what we're doing. It's a very useful tool at that. But generally, you should always install modules locally to your project. The reason for this is primarily versioning. Different versions of Node packages can do different things, have different features, have breaking changes, and all that fun stuff. The official word on it is packages should be installed locally. There are two exceptions. The first exception I already mentioned. Things like HTTP server, which is a utility that we use across our computer. Second exception are hybrids, where you install a tool globally so that it can register a command globally on your system, but then you also install it locally so that the actual code that gets executed from that command is locked down in a version number, in a particular version number. However, for libraries such as jQuery or Lodash or React or whatever you're going to be installing, they need to be local. Don't ever install them globally. That's awful, and awful things will happen. Anyway, so the example that I'm going to be using in this video is going to be Lodash. Now, we won't talk about Lodash in this video. We're going to talk about it in the next one. But this is the library we're going to be to demonstrate how to install things locally. So fortunately, like pretty much every single JavaScript package on the planet, it is available through NPM. So right now I'm looking at the Lodash NPM page. So let's go ahead and take a look at how, well, we install it. It's actually pretty straightforward. So hopping back over here, I have code open to a new empty folder, and I have a command window open. All I'm going to do is type in npm install. Now note the name, this name right here. This is the name of the package. So we say npm install Lodash. Then I'm just going to hit enter. I'm not going to specify a -G. Now we see npm go off and do its thing, and it installs. Now we get these warnings. Ignore these warnings. We'll address these very shortly in another video. Now the important thing to see here is what we have right there. So we see that it installed Lodash, and the specific version number was 3.10.1. We will be talking about versions in a future video. If we hop back over into code, we see that a folder appeared, node_modules. So you'll notice it's named the same thing as that node modules in our global namespace in our app roaming app data folder, which contained our HTTP server. And this is the same concept. So we have a node modules folder. And underneath node modules, we see Lodash. Now what's really cool about this is pretty much most NPM packages are published directly from their source, and they're all open source. So the idea is you can actually go in and see the source code of the entirety of the package. So don't ever be afraid of opening up node modules if you want to see how something works. That being said, in addition to the entirety of the source code, there's also typically a pre-compiled file that contains everything, so that when you include a library, you only need to load a single file. So in this case, this is that index.js. So this index.js contains an installation of Lodash that you would see on a browser, for example. Lodash is very popular for client-side development as well as server-side development. Anyway, if you ever want to see what packages you have installed and what dependencies those packages you have installed are, you can always go back and type in npm list. npm list will list all of your installed packages. It bases it off of the node modules that's located in the current directory. All right, so now the question is, how do we load in a module or a package that we've installed locally? Well, it should be pretty straightforward. You guys probably have already guessed it. Require. Now, what do we put in here? Now, we can certainly do node modules Lodash index, or index.js, doesn't matter. We could do that, but there's a much better way. We simply have to say _ require Lodash. What it's going to do is the node runtime, and I can prove to you that this works, by the way. You don't have to take my word for it. I can go ahead and console log out that underscore and see that we get an object with a bunch of these really awesome methods, some of which we'll take a look at in the next video. So we see it's being loaded. So what's happening here? Well, basically the node runtime, before it goes and searches for a global package, it will search for node modules folders. And if it finds a node module folder with a name that we pass into require, it will load that in. Now notice that we're not doing / here because that would be a relative path. We're loading in an installed module. Now this syntax works for, or not including a / works for locally installed modules, globally installed modules, as well as built-in modules. Anyway, to make this example a little bit more interesting and something that really needs to be pointed out for people who might be new to this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a folder. And not there, code, stop it. There. And I'm going to call this folder src, and in src I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it app.js. Then inside of index.js, I'm going to remove all this code and simply say require /source app, which will, of course, since we're using the /, we're a relative path, so we're loading up our app module. Inside of app, how do we include Lodash? Well, people might think you might do something like this, which is incorrect. Because remember, // means relative path. So how do we include Lodash? We're not in the same folder anymore as this node modules. So how does a node know where to look? Well, the answer is magic. It will be able to load this. If you don't believe me, console log out and node . Or node source app. So it's being loaded. So what is going on here? Well, to explain this, I'm going to pop open my file explorer and show you guys what we have here. Now, inside of source, we have an app.js, and you can see the app.js right there. All app.js does is it loads in Lodash. So because we're requesting a module without a /, Node is going to go through a module loading algorithm. The first thing it's going to do is check the current directory for the existence of a node modules folder. If a node modules folder does not exist, it's going to go up to the parent folder and search that directory for the existence of a node modules folder. In this case, it finds it, so it opens it up. Then we'll check that folder to see if anything corresponds to what we typed in. In this case, it does. It'll load in Lodash, and it'll then execute index, and then it'll return that execution and assign that to our underscore. It'll keep on doing this until it hits the root of the file system. And if it hits the root of the file system, it knows that it's not a locally installed module. So what it'll do is it'll check the globally installed modules for that. And then, of course, if it's not found in the globally installed module as well, then it just won't be loaded at all, and you'll get an error. So that's how it works. Very important to understand that. So it's very useful for any sized application because you'll commonly have many files and folders in your Node application that you'll need to be able to require in modules. Now, some of you might be thinking, would it be possible, for example, to go in and create multiple Node modules folders within the same project? The answer is yes, it would be possible, but don't do that. Every project should have one Node modules folder at the root of the project. And that's just how things should be written. There's a big reason behind that, actually, but we're going to talk more about that once we talk about package.json and creating our own dependency graph. Alrighty. So, yeah, we're not talking about Lodash yet. We'll do that in the next video. But before we do, there's a couple other things I want to point out real fast. And to point this out is going to require me to download and install a module that actually includes a bunch of other modules. See, Lodash doesn't include anything else. It has no dependency. So to show off how node module dependencies work, I'm going to include a package that does have a lot. So let's come back to our command window, and I'm going to type in npm install react. This isn't a video series about React. I'll probably do one in the not too distant future. But this gives us a great example of a module that includes a bunch of other modules. And in fact, you can see it right here where it lists all of the things that requires. And what's interesting about this is React depends on Envify. But notice how Envify depends on JS transform, and JS transform depends on source map, which depends on AMD define. So you'll notice that there's actually a huge dependency graph, and that's really not that uncommon in Node packages. Node packages are generally very small, self-contained. Node has a very Unix philosophy. Do one thing and do it well. So which means you will have a massive dependency graph of all of the little modules that include other or require other modules and so on. And we can always get this list again at any point by typing in NPM List. And of course, by typing in NPM List, we can easily debug issues that might arise from different versions of different packages intermingling. So if you have an issue where you might have a package that's being required, that's the incorrect version, NPM List is a great diagnostic tool. Now, so you see this on the left. Let's go ahead and look at what Node Modules looks like. If we open up Node Modules, check this out. We now have a bunch of modules that we didn't even include directly, but were included indirectly by dependencies and dependencies of dependencies. So if you do not see this, if the only folders you see are .bin, React, and Lodash, you have an old version of NPM and need to go update it. Either update it or uninstall it and reinstall it with the installer if you're on Mac OS or Windows. What you should see is this. Maybe not exactly this, but you should see a bunch of folders. And the idea is that these are all dependencies. So when React goes in and has some code inside of its lib folder that depends on a module, Node will go out and it will go all the way up to this Node modules folder to check to see if it exists. Now, there's one thing I want to point out. Most of the time, all of your Node modules will be flattened out into this directory, but not all of the time. Now, like I said, NPM or Node has a very Unix philosophy, do one thing, do it well. There's also the issue of versioning. So different packages might depend on other packages, but at different versions. Because, sometimes new versions come out that completely break that package. And the other package that depends on the old version of its dependency package needs to always load in that specific version of its dependency package. It can't load in anything newer, otherwise it'll break. So what happens when, let's say, package A and package B both depend on package C, but of different versions? The answer to that, one of those package Cs will get dumped into your Node Modules folder. The other one of those module Cs will get dumped into a Node Modules folder that's inside of that package. So when this package, for example, requires in module C, let's assume that there's a Node Modules here and module C is loaded into it. When a package, when it includes that, it's going to get the one that's installed in here. If a one that's installed in here doesn't exist, it will get the one that's installed on the flattened file system here. Now, this used to be a huge problem on Windows. Well, actually a huge problem on all platforms, because what used to happen was with old versions of NPM, all you would see here would be React, bin, and Lodash, and all of these dependencies would be stuffed into the React, where, since React is the only person who depends on those packages. Now, the problem with that is, A, repetition. There's a lot of really base packages that a lot of things depend on in NPM. So you don't want to, murder your file system with a repeated source code and distribution of so many different packages. And B, the file names would get ridiculously long. And the reason for that is you would have package A, depends on package B, depends on package C, depends on package D, and so on. And each one would be another Node Modules nested in another package, nested in another Node Modules, and so on and so on. You get to the point where the NTFS file system would start throwing a fit about the length of those file names. So you would need special, you would need to go into the command line and start messing around with file names in order to even delete or move those files. Fortunately, in a later version of NPM, that's been fixed, and it's now generally flat. The only cases it won't be flat are in version discrepancies, where, like I said, package A and package B depend on a different version of package C. But you don't see that very often. All right, so that is installing Node modules. That is how Node modules are resolved. Keep that in mind. This is very important for working with this. Otherwise, you will get frustrated. I know that some things might seem like magic, but again, my job here is to remove as much magic as possible from this. So yeah, in the next video, we're going to take a quick look at Lodash and also talk about an ES6 feature that I'm going to start using in this series to reduce the amount of code that we're going to have to write. So we'll see you then.